We will now hear from the next speaker. That is Ingerid Opdahl, who's also from Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies with a PhD from the University of Birmingham. At the Institute, she heads the Russian Security and Defense Program, and her research interests is really much related to the relationship with Russian political economy and foreign policy. And she has a book forthcoming on this issue. In her contribution to this project, Rusikopol, she is looking at Russian energy companies in the Arctic and their relations to the state, and at elite groups with violence potential. Ingrid, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you all for your interest in our topics today. Now, my topic, my talk, is on the challenge of being a strong state in the Russian Arctic. This is research in progress, and today I will speak about the difficulty of tasking oil and gas companies for regional development. You have certain aims, you have certain strategies, but you have to implement them. Or, well, do you, but you aim to implement them. So, to draw out the general background, I'll tell you a bit about Russia's oil and gas development in the Arctic. And then I'll go on to the state's plans, policy, aims, and strategies for the Arctic, also part of the background. Now, to task oil and gas companies to deliver on regional development, to get them aboard, also with the state's policy priorities, is something quite different than actually just stating that you have aims and strategies. So to illustrate that, I'll bring forward a small case study in the third part of this paper, which is going to be in the sort of completed research, one of several small case studies. And I'll outline some implications for what it means to be a strong state in the Arctic in the Russian case. One important conclusion is that delivering on policy is really a complicated task. Especially as our previous session today showed, when considerations of short-term stability so often become more important in everyday political life. But this is crucial to deliver on policy. It's crucial for Russia's economic development and political development, also beyond 2024. There is, well, to be a politician, there also has to be some action. Now, just for the background, this is a map of Russia's Arctic zone, and I've strengthened the polar circle for reference. That is my only addition to this map, and if it's slightly uneven, that's just my hand. You might see that this map looks a bit different. It's based on a source from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of the Russian Federation, so it looks a bit different from maps that we normally see. We discussed a bit before we started today whether the sea border delimitation is current, but in any case, the main point here is not the sea border. The main point is Russia's Arctic zone. It was defined by presidential decree in 2014. It is the geographic area that I'm talking about today. It includes, it's a motley region. It's not necessarily a very natural region because it includes 4 regional components of the Russian Federation and some sub-regions in their entirety, but it also includes parts of regions. There are some other issues with definition here. The Arctic zone, as defined, is not the same as regions designated as northern or near northern or subject to special compensation and support schemes, but it covers parts of it, the most northern parts of it. So there is some overlap in terms. Now, just a quick background on Russia's Arctic oil and gas. Now, in general, the context here is that significant parts of Russia's oil and gas production is moving north. And the northern regions are particularly significant in keeping up production in the future in three ways: the discovery of new fields, pushing the borders of existing fields, and branching out towards the north from already existing production, so that you have your production facilities, you have your fields, you know that there are good fields just directly to the north of existing production, and you just build on what you have. And also, of course, at established fields, you have enhanced recovery, which is a technological drive that's hitting the industry. Now, moving oil production north requires a lot of investment on the part of companies, of course, also on part of the state to develop the infrastructure. Now, part of the context here is that the high hopes for Arctic offshore mega projects from the 2010s, so the high hopes of 10 years ago, have not come true. The hopes are really high, both for the project best known in Norway, Stockman project, and potentially for others, because there are some good fields there, mainly in gas. So far, the only offshore production that actually produces offshore is Gazprom's Prirazlomnoye oil field. What has happened is something different. It is the LNG mega projects developed by Novatek. Best known is Yamal LNG. Under development, there is also Arctic LNG to the east of Yamal. These are onshore, near-shore gas fields with LNG production facilities where liquid natural gas is then exported, mainly by sea. There is also some near-shore oil. Now, of course, the explanation is, I'll just outline it rather quickly. Well, importantly for all Arctic projects, there is a very high global price threshold for them to be commercially viable, around $80 a barrel or higher. The project, just the whole sheer complexity of developing an Arctic field is staggering. There were very long lead times. You need partners. It's actually probably not doable offshore without partners. And you're very vulnerable to price volatility. So you really need a very stable outlook of rather high oil prices for this to come together. Of course, in the offshore, you have more constraints. Not just the need for partners, but also now the international sanctions against the Russian oil industry, which targets specifically technology and finance for offshore projects. So there is an acute dearth of partners and finance, very few to choose between, and especially among the Western-based international oil companies that have that knowledge. And of course, you can't really access the necessary massive amounts of hindsight. And there are other constraints on the national level that I will not go into today. With hindsight, it's possible to ask whether expectations were too high. That would be an interesting discussion, Arild, at some point. But you still do have development onshore. So what are the aims and strategies that I mentioned in the beginning? Well, the current post-Soviet aims and strategies go back to the foundations of state policy in the Arctic from as late as 2008. The list of documents on the right is absolutely not exhaustive, but it includes top-level documents specifically on the Arctic and more very relevant documents that are not specifically on the Arctic. They, to a large extent, refer to each other. From 2008, there are two broad themes. On the one hand, you have strategic and security aims. And of course, the other aim, the other theme, is what I'm talking mainly of now. The Arctic zone as a part of Russia in need of socio-economic development, an object of development. Now, the balance between these themes changes somewhat over time and naturally between the documents, but they connect in at least two ways. First, the Arctic is seen as a strategic resource base for Russia, and several of the documents see the Arctic as an object of global competition for resources. Secondly, national security aims have an important place. They take up a lot of space in the central policy documents, and they really frame a lot of the aims for socio-economic development. So state control is important. Control of resources matter because they are strategic, and control of Arctic territory, in the end, secures the state. Now, the economic development in the Arctic zone is here seen as underdeveloped, which is a bit funny because if you look at the entire polar regions of the Arctic, Russia's Arctic zone is actually quite developed. But of course, compared to the rest of Russia, it is underdeveloped. The strategic resources are seen to be of national importance. And of course, those resources are hydrocarbons, gas and oil, coal, mineral resources, especially aluminium, but also rare earth elements. Now, the remoteness of most of the Arctic zones and its considerable resources have placed transport and infrastructure development on top of the list of priorities. So in general, one may see Russia's aims regarding the development of the Arctic zones as developmental. It aims to be a strong state. It implements narrowly modernizing policies. It's essential to actually deliver and implement. It is politically significant. Now, implementation has been a very sore point. And only over the last year have we seen an end, perhaps, or at least a better situation when it comes to previous fragmentation at the top level of the state among the agencies that actually are supposed to deliver. Which tells us a lot about when the state has a plan, still regional development is a complex task. You need to work with the oil and gas companies. They, of course, aim to generate profits, but they're also interested in a lot of other things, like maximizing their production, development options also in the future. So the state can create incentives, like tax discounts, subsidies. It may institute requirements attached to licenses and permits. But even so, even when companies are state-owned or indirectly controlled by the state, it's still a very complex process to make them fulfill state priorities for regional development, especially with the high costs. And especially, this is Russia's political economy. So the people in charge of the major companies, they sit there also as a matter of privilege. They wield real influence. They are politically significant entities. They have informal relations to the top of the state. And this is where the Northern Sea route comes in. At the top map shows the entire Northeast Passage, and the bottom map shows the part of the Northeast Passage that's in Russian terminology is the Northern Sea route with a special administrative body, and, as we will now hear, special targets for traffic. So within a lot of the documents, and specifically the development program from 2014 and 2017, there was a lot of efforts, there was a lot of effort going in on behalf of the state to obligate the companies to contribute to regional development, but it was not sufficient. Nothing really happened. So when Putin returned to the presidency in 2018, he designated a list of a national project, major policy priorities, and quite quickly, it turned out that one of those national projects included targets for the Northern Sea route. Now, the target was not just modernizing, expanding capacity, it was also increasing traffic. In effect, actually quadrupling it from around 20 million tons at the time to 80 million tons in 2024. 80 million tons of whatever, but whatever would have to mainly come from new oil and gas and metal export from the region adjacent to the Northern Sea route, because traffic transit is very low. So setting a target for traffic was establishing a lever for influencing the oil and gas companies to actually come forward with their development plans. But it was still not enough. The target did not seem realistic, even to government ministries. Export on the route was set to increase substantially, but not enough. The ministries were not optimistic. The Ministry for Natural Resources started their first estimate at around 52 million tons for 2024. And other, like the government's own analytical center, was also very skeptical of 80 million tons. When the government started to coordinate their numbers, the estimates gradually began to increase. However, reaching 80 million tons still seemed quite difficult. At this point, Putin ordered the government to create long-term contracts with the companies to oblige them to ship on the NSR, raising the stakes further. The deadline was the previous 1st of September. And now, of course, the companies began to come forward because this was politically important. Except there was one company that had been really slow in picking up this sort of challenge. Rosneft, Russia's second largest oil and gas company, had not really responded to the proposals for increasing traffic on the NSR. But at this point, Rosneft came forward with a suggestion that would bring additional volumes onto the Northern Sea route, but in turn, it wanted to negotiate for preferential treatment and tax discounts on already established production. So it wanted to make some money on what they were already doing and then offer a bit more. Now, in this case, the Ministry of Finance refused to support a sort of a retrospective tax discount, and this is where the case stands now. And the new plan for the Northern Sea route development to 2035, approved by the government a month ago today, is based on forecasts that, perhaps not entirely realistically, imply that the goal of 80 million tons on the Northern Sea route by 2024 will somehow be reached. However, to deliver in the longer term will depend also on offering up some sort of tax discounts and compelling the companies to invest in infrastructure. So we end with a set of sort of questions and dilemmas. So if you want to be a strong state as Russia in the Arctic, it's clear that petroleum will matter. But how? How to deliver on development plans? There are economic and political costs to any potential effect you want to attain. Because when you pursue economic development, you need your companies. But when tasking them in the sense of giving political directions, you might incentivize rent-seeking, and you open up a sort of a negotiating field. You may also, if you respond to their demands for additional tax discounts, for example, you may drive the economy in an unsustainable direction. So what is then a strong state? Is it possible to deliver on development no matter what? And what are the costs? And also, to balance that economic development with your other aims of reaching strategic goals, securing your territory and having political stability, can you have it all in a region like the Arctic, where everything is so expensive? Well, I will leave it at there, because this is research in progress, and I have more case studies to put into this particular paper. And thank you for your attention and your patience, and leave the rest for discussion.